In about 20 minutes, she turned off the burners. She fished the carrots out, placed them in a bowl, pulled the eggs out, and placed them in a bowl. And she finished by labeling the coffee out and into a bowl. Turning to her daughter, she said, "Tell me what you see." She brought her, carrots, eggs, and coffee, her daughter replied. She brought her daughter closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did and noted that they were soft. She then asked her to take an egg and break it, and after pulling off the shell, she observed the egg was now hard-boiled. Finally, she asked her to sip the coffee. The daughter did and smiled as she tasted its rich aroma. The daughter then asked, as most daughters sometimes do, "What's the point, Mom?" Her mother explained that each of these objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water, but each had reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to the boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had protected its liquid interior, but after sitting through the boiling water, its insides became hardened. The coffee beans were unique, however. After they were in the boiling water, they had changed the water. We were talking about that fairy sound before we started service today. I thought maybe you were jumping ahead. "Which are you?" she asked her daughter. "When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you the carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity you wilt and lose your strength? Or are you the egg that starts out with a malleable heart but changes with the heat? Like the egg, you start out with a fluid spirit, but after a death, a breakup, a financial hardship, or some other trial, you become hardened and stiff. Your shell might look the same, but on the inside, your spirit and your heart's been hardened. Or are you like the coffee bean? The bean actually changes the hot water, the very circumstance that brings the pain. When the water gets hot, it releases fragrance and flavor. If you are like the bean, when things are at their worst, you get better and change the situation around you." So, my question today is very simple. Which are you? Are you a carrot? Are you an egg? Or are you a coffee bean? And this is not a trick question. I've tried to give you the correct answer. But if we were to tell the truth, I think we've been all those things, haven't we? In life. That as we went through adversity and trials and terrors, sometimes we've reacted like the carrot. Sometimes somebody has hurt us so bad we become the egg. But if our faith is strong and in place, then we can be the coffee bean, can't we? So maybe the question should be this: how do I become a coffee bean? How do I become a coffee bean? What's the secret to making coffee instead of mushy carrots? And as I got to thinking this week about Memorial Day, I figured it out. I remember sitting around, and my grandfather, Howard, never spoke much about the war until the last end of his life, and then he started talking about being in the trenches in World War I in France, and the mustard gas and what it did to people. And yet, he lived a very nice life. I never saw it affect him in any way. Most of us in this generation know people that had been in World War II and came through some pretty dire circumstances. If you want to even get a taste of the realism of what went on in their lives, watch the movie Saving Private Ryan as they land on the beaches of Normandy. And that's probably mild compared compared to what those men saw. And then we had the Korean War, and I remember the pictures as I was in high school of the Vietnam War, which was in full swing by then. And we've lost people in Iraq, and now Afghanistan. We have a conflict going on. And yet I was remembered that, and we hear stories about some of them have lost their sanity and have shot people, etc., etc., etc. But the vast majority of the people that went overseas came back coffee beans, didn't they? We get the publicity on the ones that don't, that come back as an egg or a carrot, but the vast majority, if you stop and look at it, are coffee beans. They made it through, they came back, they kept their sanity, and the only answer I can tell you is this: faith. I've dealt with a lot of people from the World War II era, because as my ministry has been in that thing, we've lost a lot of them. And every time that I would go to one of their houses, every time that I would sit down with them to talk with them or pray with them, almost 99% of them would say, wait a minute, and they went to their bedroom and brought me out a Bible. Do they still give them to them as they put them on the boat to go overseas? I got news for you. They still had it. All these years later, and it was torn, and it was dirty, and it was written in, and pages were taped together, but they still kept it because it had meant that much to them as they were in harm's way. They made it through by faith. What's the old adage? There are no atheists in a foxhole. If you read the accounts of POWs like John McCain's, it tells you that they kept their sanity. They made it through those times because they remembered Bible verses that they had learned and memorized as children. And some of them remembered some of the hymns that they sang growing up. So in those cells where they couldn't be stopped, they would recite those back and forth to one another when they could, and they would sing so that everybody else would start to sing. It wasn't the government that kept them going. It was Jesus Christ and their faith that got them through. They got them through. So I'm thinking I become a coffee bean when I place my faith in the right people. And there's only one. His name is Jesus Christ. And the story I want to share with you this morning, the text tells me about that. It's one of my favorites. As a matter of fact, for those of you that have ever been in my office, it's on the wall. You'll see the picture. It's from the 4th chapter of Mark, verses 35 through 41. It says this: As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, Silence, be still. Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? The disciples were absolutely terrified. Who is this man? They asked each other. Even the wind and the waves obey him. As he always did, Jesus had been teaching all day. He's tired. And he gets in the boat with his disciples and says, let's go to the other side. I got to get away from here for a while. And you notice even that doesn't work. Other boats follow them across the lake. It's called the Sea of Galilee, but it's, I think, about half the size of Lake Erie of that. Not even that. I'm trying to picture it in my... Oh, well, geography was never one of my strong suits. That's why I now have a car with a GPS. But they get in a boat, and the way the boats were, if you look at pictures of the boats of that time period, there was a place underneath the back. Is that the bow? What's the back of the boat? Stern. Wasn't in the Navy, I don't know. But there's a place back there where they would keep like the nets and stuff to keep it on so you weren't walking on everything else. And it's, if you look at the commentary stuff, it says that that's probably where he was at. He had crawled in there and was laying on a cushion, taking a nap. And while he's doing that, it says a fierce storm. Not just a storm, a fierce storm. And it must have been pretty good to scare the disciples because like half of them were fishermen, right? They would have been used to the water. And if you talk to Pastor Don about his experiences in the Middle East and talk to anybody that's been there, you'll find out that the Lake Sea of Galilee sits between mountains. And what happens is sometimes the wind will come down those mountains. And a storm can kick up like that. It's not like being on Lake Erie where you can look at Canada and see the clouds coming. It's like now. So they're rowing across and the wind and the waves start to kick up and pretty soon the boat's taking on water. And I don't know whether it was through hysteria or sarcasm, but they go get Jesus up and says, don't you care? You understand we're driving out here and you're taking a nap? And it says that Jesus stood up and commanded the waves and the wind to stop. It says, "Silent, be still." I love to go back to the original translation on this one because I can just see Jesus stand up and say, "Peace, be still." And when the Creator talked, the creation listened. It stopped. The storm was over. And they could sail on a flat sea again. I'm guessing the people in the boats that were following were pretty happy too. Peace, be still. And then he uses a teaching moment, right? Like, you guys still don't get it? I think at that moment, probably a good portion of them finally did. And they said, how is it that even the winds and the waves obey this Jesus? And in my mind, I think that some of them at that moment went, he really is who he says he is. He really is. You understand that faith makes you a coffee bean? Jesus was sleeping because he had pretty strong faith in God, didn't he? Didn't bother him at all that the boat was, maybe it was like rocking a cradle, I don't know. He slept through it until they woke him up. He wasn't worried about it. He knew God would bring him safely through it. Don't you wish we could be that way? Because, it's really easy to live in life when your sea's calm, and when it's just like a glassy surface and there's wind in your sails and the sun's out and things are going great. It's real easy to live. It's real easy to get through the day. It's real easy to smile and have a good time. But sometimes those winds come down the mountains of life too, don't they? Sometimes you're sailing along and it's pretty outside and all of a sudden, bang. Sometimes you don't even see it coming, just like on the Sea of Galilee. You don't know that your loved one comes in and says, "I don't want to be married anymore." You don't know that the doctor walks in the room and says you have cancer. You don't know that they cleaned out your bank account because you've been scammed. You don't know about that storm that strikes suddenly. And that's a lot harder to live in. A lot harder to see through the clouds and the lightning and the rain and know that you're going to be safe. It's a lot harder to sail on that sea of life. And yet it doesn't have to be. Because the real question is this: is Jesus in your boat? Is Jesus in your boat? Because if he is, he'll stand up up in the middle of your storm and do the same thing he did clear back on the Sea of Galilee. He can stand up and say, peace, be still. Don't go there. Don't get upset. Don't get an ulcer. It'll be okay. I've got you. Put your hand in my hand. It'll be okay. I'll carry you through. We all have storms. We all have problems. We always will. The difference between whether we're a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean is how deep is your faith. You get stewed or hard-boiled, or do you make love? That's what it boils down to, isn't it? Maybe the more important question is, do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God? Do you believe that He came to earth, that He lived, that He died, and that He was resurrected for you? Do you believe that He sits on the right-hand side of God the Father Almighty and intercedes on your behalf? Because if you do, it's kind of easy to say, peace be still. If you don't, then you're going to be a carrot every time. That's faith, to believe. That's faith, to sail with Jesus instead of by yourself. That's faith, to look at the storms of life and go, We're all on a journey that takes place every day, for every moment of your life. And those storms can arise at anything else, and it's faith that will keep you from being stewed or hard-boiled. You know, I walk into a lot of people's storms. I walk into their storms in their homes. I walk into the storms in this church. I walk into the storms at the hospital. I walk into the storms at the funeral home. I walk into the storms at the jail. And no matter what storm it is, I've only got one answer for it. Have faith. It's all about Jesus. And if you believe, you'll find the hope and the promise that He came to give you. Let me change your thinking a little bit this morning. Look at it this way. When something happens, don't tell God how big your storm is. Tell your storm how big your God is. See the difference? Instead of get your faith to the point where you don't scream and kick and panic every time the storm arises. And then you go to prayer. Will God get me out of another one? If you can change your thinking, you don't worry about the storms. Because you know God is bigger than any storm that you can experience in this life. So the next time one of your storms arises, make a cup of coffee.